Welcome to the Fogwood Files, where fog lingers among the trees and the forest holds its secrets close. The Canadian Maritimes are a land of silence and shadow, where paths dissolve into mist and voices echo without a source. Here, beneath the canopy of pines, people have witnessed things they cannot explain. Their words remain as fragments of a larger mystery, stories carried through the woods like whispers in the dark. Tonight, we open one of those accounts and step deeper into the ledger of the strange.
Case File 004, Wendigo Encounter. Date of encounter, November 1995. Location, Northern Labrador, Canada. Report compiled, January 1996.
I've thought for years about whether to write this down. For a long time, I convinced myself no one would believe me, and maybe they still won't. But I can't carry this memory alone anymore. It has rotted me like a sickness, bleeding into my dreams and hollowing out the quiet parts of my life. Maybe by putting it to paper, I can convince myself that what happened in Labrador wasn't just the product of isolation and fear. It was the mid-90s and I was 27 years old, serving in the Canadian Forces. By then, most of the Cold War surveillance infrastructure was phasing out, but some remote monitoring and weather stations still required manned presence. I was posted to one of those, a small out-of-the-way listening post in northern Labrador, hundreds of kilometers from anything resembling a town. My orders were simple. Maintain the outpost, log atmospheric and signal data, keep the generators running, and hold position until my rotation was up. Rotations ran 6 weeks. 6 weeks alone in a cabin-sized military structure surrounded by snow and black spruce forest that stretched to the horizon in all directions. It wasn't glamorous, but I wasn't in it for the glamour. I'd been restless, burned out by garrison monotony, and thought solitude might bring clarity. I told myself I could handle it. When I arrived, I replaced another soldier, Corporal Whalen, who'd been on duty since late September. He didn't look right when I met him. His skin was pale, his eyes ringed with purple shadows. He chain-smoked while waiting for the transport, and when I asked how his rotation went, he muttered, "You'll see." I pressed him. See what? He shook his head and looked toward the tree line, where the wind hissed through black spruce like 1,000 whispers. Finally, he said, "Just don't go out at night unless you have to. And if you hear something calling your name, you didn't. Got it?" I thought he was messing with me. Soldiers love to spook the new guy, but the way his voice cracked told me he meant it. When the helicopter lifted him away, he didn't look back. I remember standing there, my duffel at my feet, watching the rotor wash scatter snow across the ice-crusted ground. The station loomed behind me, a squat, prefabricated structure of steel and insulation, no bigger than a double-wide trailer, its paint weathered by wind and salt. The satellite dish groaned as it tracked the sky. Beyond it stretched the Labrador wilderness, endless, white, silent. I had never felt so small in my entire life. The first week was uneventful. The outpost ran on diesel generators and had a supply cache large enough to last months. My daily routine was structured, checked signal equipment, log weather data, test emergency lines, perform generator maintenance, eat, exercise, sleep. In theory, it was manageable. But the silence out there isn't like any silence you've ever known. It's not the quiet of an empty house or a city park at night. It's vast. It presses against your eardrums until you start imagining sounds that aren't there. Footsteps, whispers, the creak of doors. The wind was constant, moaning across the ridges, but underneath it, I often thought I heard something else. By day, the landscape was almost beautiful. The sky stretched endless and pale, the snow crusted in hard glittered sheets. Caribou herds passed in the distance, moving like brown rivers across the tundra. Ravens wheeled and croaked overhead. At night, the aurora borealis tore across the sky in curtains of green and purple, so bright they cast shadows on the snow. Inside the outpost, though, the isolation crept into me. Shadows stretched long in the corners, and every creak of settling steel made my pulse jump. I caught myself checking the locks 3 or 4 times before bed. At first, I thought it was just adjustment, solitude playing tricks on my nerves, but the feeling that I wasn't alone never went away. The first real sign that something wasn't right came on my 9th night at the outpost. I woke suddenly, something past 2 in the morning, to a smell that made my stomach lurch. It wasn't just unpleasant, it was invasive, like the stench had seeped into my lungs and clung to the back of my throat. It reminded me of several things at once, none of them good. Imagine wet fur left to rot in a damp basement, a sour musk like unwashed skin overlaid with something chemical and acrid, almost like burning rubber. There was also a coppery tang underneath, faint but sharp like dried blood. I sat up on my bunk, disoriented, gagging as I tried to breathe shallowly through my mouth. The ventilation system hummed steadily, pulling in the clean air from outside, but the smell seemed to crawl through the steel walls themselves. I checked the generator readouts, all normal. I even opened a hatch, thinking perhaps a fuel line had leaked. But outside, the air was sharp and clean with frost. The stink was only inside, as though something invisible had passed through. The odor lingered for nearly 10 minutes before it finally began to fade, leaving behind the faint suggestion of musk and smoke. I lay awake for hours after, heart pounding, straining my ears for any sound beyond the endless groan of the wind. The next morning, I stepped outside to clear my head and found the tracks. At first glance, they were human. 5 toes, narrow heel, the long impression of an arch. But something about them twisted the shape into something deeply wrong. The proportions were all off. The toes are too long, almost claw-like, spread wider than any bare foot should have been in the snow. The heel pressed sharp and narrow, leaving deep gouges like talons dragging behind. And though they resembled a person's prints, they were far too large, not wide and powerful, but stretched, elongated, like the foot of a starving giant. The stride length unsettled me the most. Each print was impossibly far from the next, as though whatever made them moved with unnerving, gliding ease. The trail circled the outpost once before veering back into the tree line. There was no sign of hesitation, no pause, no meandering, like an animal searching for food, just one clean circuit like a predator taking stock of its prey. I crouched over them for a long time, my breath steaming in the cold. I told myself it could be melting and refreezing, snow warping under the cycle of sun and night, but deep down I knew what I was looking at was deliberate. Something had walked there. Something that wanted me to see it had walked there. From that day forward, I noticed small things I hadn't before. The generator hiccuping even though the fuel was fresh, lights flickering for half a second at a time. Once I swore I heard static muttering over the shortwave, broken syllables that almost sounded like words. I kept up my routines, logged everything in the official report, but my notes became shorter, more strained. Unusual odor in cabin, source undetermined. Tracks discovered near facility, possibly distorted human or large animal. Intermittent shortwave interference. Cold, clinical, but what I really meant was I smelled something that shouldn't exist, I saw something that doesn't make sense, and I feel something is watching me. The isolation of the outpost no longer felt neutral. It felt hostile. The silence pressed harder. Every shadow outside the floodlights seemed thicker, darker. The first signs had appeared, and I knew, even if I didn't admit it out loud yet, that I was not alone out there. The day after finding the distorted footprints, I decided to comb through the outpost's logbooks. It was partly routine. I was supposed to keep my own notes updated and submit them when my rotation ended, but after the smell in those prints, I wanted to see if the soldier before me had noticed anything similar. The official reports were stacked neatly in binders, each one stamped with dates and signatures. Most entries were exactly what you'd expect. Weather updates, generator maintenance logs, notes on shortwave transmissions, dry, procedural. But as I moved towards the back of the most recent binder, the entries began to change. The handwriting grew less tidy, the language less clinical. One entry caught my eye. Heard something pacing outside at 0200. Thought it was caribou, but steps too far apart. Didn't open hatch, didn't want to see. Another few days later. Smelling cabin again. Can't scrub it out. Like rot and smoke together. Won't leave my clothes. The next several pages showed a clear decline. Routine logs were replaced by fragmented notes, sometimes just single sentences scribbled in the margins. Saw it in the tree line, I think. Not supposed to be here. Eyes too bright, too far apart. The very last entry wasn't in the binder at all, but torn from a loose sheet tucked between the pages. The writing was almost illegible, as though done with a shaking hand. It's circles. Always circles. Won't come in. Not yet. I sat back in the chair, staring at the words. My stomach knotted tight. For a moment, I could see the soldier's face as he'd left on the supply helicopter. Pale, eyes a little too wide, jaw set as though he wanted to speak but thought better of it. That vague warning he gave me as he climbed aboard echoed fresh in my head. Just don't go out at night unless you have to, and if you hear something calling your name, you didn't. I closed the binder slowly and pushed it aside. The words felt heavy, carrying a fear I didn't want to absorb. I told myself the guy had just been checking under the isolation. 6 weeks of solitude in this frozen wasteland would eat at anyone. I'd already begun to feel the strain, and maybe he'd just let it get to him more than most. So I shrugged it off, forced myself back into routine, and buried the memories of those pages under the weight of daily tasks. But the sentences lingered in the back of my mind like seeds waiting to grow. The real terror began in the 3rd week. I was outside checking the generator when I noticed the silence. Not just absence of birds or wind, absolute silence. The kind that crushes down, suffocating. I froze, breath steaming in the air. That's when I saw it. A caribou, or what was left of one, lying 30 meters from the outpost. It had been torn apart, not butchered like a hunter would, not killed like wolves would. Its rib cage was shattered outward, its spine twisted like wire, flesh hanging in long strips. The snow was black with frozen blood. What chilled me most was the precision. Some organs were missing entirely, but not eaten. Taken. That night, the smell returned, stronger. It clung to my clothes, my bedding, even though every hatch was sealed. I barely slept. On November 28th, I saw movement at the edge of the floodlights. Something tall. Too tall. It stood between the black spruces, just watching. When I trained the spotlight, it slipped back into the tree line without a sound. The following nights blurred together. Scratches along the metal siding, the faint sound of something circling in the snow. Once, while dozing in the control chair, I woke to hear my own name whispered through the intercom system, though the channel was closed. I stopped going outside after dark. The breaking point came in early December. The day had been clear but brutally cold, the kind of cold where your eyelashes freeze together. I was eating dinner when the smell hit again. Rancid, suffocating, like it was crawling down my throat. Then came the sound. Heavy steps on the roof. I froze. The roof groaned under the weight. Something massive was walking above me, deliberate, pacing. Dust sifted from the ceiling. My hands shook as I gripped the edge of the table. Then, silence. I crept to the nearest porthole window. At first I saw nothing but darkness and snow reflecting in the floodlights. Then it stepped into view. It was taller than the doorway, gaunt but impossibly strong, with limbs too long for its frame. Its skin clung tight over bone, grayish, patchy with frost. Its head resembled something between a man and a stag, but twisted, the jaw elongated, teeth jagged and uneven. Its eyes glowed faintly, not with reflection, but with their own pale fire. It looked straight at me. I staggered back, heart hammering. The thing tilted its head as if curious, then let out a sound, a shriek mixed with a human wail and an animal scream. So piercing, I dropped to my knees and clamped my hands over my ears. The floodlights flickered. When they came back, it was gone. But the footsteps returned. All night it circled the station, scraping claws against the metal, rattling the doors, breathing against the hatches. I sat in the control room with every light on, unable to move, convinced that if I blink, it would be inside. From that night onward, the torment never stopped. The smell became constant, seeping from vents and floorboards. The mutilated remains of animals appeared daily around the station. Foxes, ptarmigan, caribou, torn apart with grotesque violence. Sometimes their pieces were arranged in patterns as if displayed. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I dreamt of its face, of the shriek that rattled my bones. Worse, sometimes I thought I heard it whispering in my dreams. My name, over and over, urging me to open the door. I lost track of days. My logs grew frantic, my handwriting shaky. I rationed food, not because supplies were low, but because I couldn't keep anything down. My skin reeked of smoke and sweat. My beard grew wild, and every time I caught my reflection, I looked less like myself. Twice more I saw it. Once crouched in the tree line, its chest heaving like a starving predator. Once crawling on all fours across the roof, limbs bending wrong, too many joints. It never tried to force entry, as if it knew I couldn't leave until my time was up. It was patient. It was savoring me. By the final week, I stopped writing reports. All I could do was survive. On December 18th, the helicopter came. I heard it before I saw it, the distant thump of blades shattering the silence. I stumbled outside into the frozen daylight, shielding my eyes against the glare. My replacement jumped down, fresh-faced, bundled in clean gear. I must have looked like a ghost to him. He asked how it was. I almost told him everything. Almost. But when my mouth opened, all that came out was, "Don't go out at night. And if you hear your name called, you didn't." He frowned but said nothing. I hauled myself onto the helicopter, my body trembling with exhaustion. As we lifted away, I dared to look back. Just before the horizon swallowed the outpost, I saw movement at the tree line. Something tall, watching, waiting. It's been months since then, and I still smell it sometimes. In crowds, on empty streets, even in my own bed. That stink of wet dog and skunk clinging unshakable. I told no one the full truth in my debrief. They would have branded me unfit for duty. I wrote equipment failure, caribou predation, psychological strain due to isolation. That was easier than explaining the thing with glowing eyes that tore animals apart and whispered my name through the steel walls. But I know what I saw. I don't know if the Wendigo was one creature or a curse that lives in the northern forests, waiting for the desperate and the alone. All I know is that it's real, and it's still out there in the silence of Labrador, patient as the cold. I survived because my time was up. That's all. End of report.
This report submitted by the Fogwood Files. Another account pulled from the fog, preserved in the records. If you'd like the next story to find its way to you, be sure to like and subscribe so you'll be here when the next fire is lit. Until then, stay close to the firelight, because in the woods, you're never truly alone, and something is always waiting just beyond the glow.